everyone, and welcome back. This is Wendy Historian, and today we are talking about the name lawsuit of 2012. In March of 2012, One Direction was just beginning its first official foray into the US music market, and they were hitting the ground running. Though they started off as the opening act for Big Time Rush's Better With You tour, it quickly became apparent that they had a pretty substantial following of their own. Their very first album signing in Natick, Massachusetts was in front of a crowd of 5,000 fans and accidentally sold out a couple days early. Yeah, don't get me started. And their first official US TV live performance occurred on The Today Show before a record-breaking crowd of over 10,000 fans, with millions more tuning in at home. But the at-home audience noticed something very strange during one of the lead-ins to the commercial break. Usually the show plays music from the performing band when a commercial break comes up, but instead a song played that was emphatically not part of One Direction's discography. Or rather, was a part of a One Direction discography, just not the one on stage. Older fans immediately knew what had happened because the same thing had happened to all of us at some point in the previous year. The Today Show went onto the iTunes store to find One Direction songs to play and had chosen the top-rated song, 2012, by One Direction. Unfortunately, neither this song nor the album it came from, The Light, were by the One Direction we had come to iTunes looking for. In 2009, 5 schoolmates from California formed a punk pop band and called themselves One Direction. Once signed, the band began releasing their music on YouTube and iTunes and playing it live at local music venues like cafes and bars and county fairs. Like hundreds of bands around the countries and thousands around the world, they were making their music and hoping for a big break. And they were still doing so in 2010, when the other One Direction was formed on The X Factor, in 2011, when the other One Direction started releasing music commercially, and in 2012, when the other One Direction started breaking into the American music market. And shortly after the incident wherein the Today Show erroneously used the US One Direction's music adjacent to the UK One Direction, the US One Direction filed a trademark lawsuit in the US courts against the UK band. I'm going to attempt to explain the legalese of this as simply as I can. US One Direction's lawsuit was filed against Simon Cowell, Psycho Entertainment, Sony Music, and all 5 of the One Direction boys as individuals. The lawsuit stated that the US One Direction had filed to trademark the band name One Direction in February of 2011, which was several months before the UK One Direction was releasing any music at all. Their claim was that before the UK band was doing anything at all, the US band was building a brand under the name One Direction. And they stated that when UK One Direction tried to trademark the band name One Direction in the US, they were informed that a band with that name already existed. And so their lawyers sat down with the US lawyers and tried to hash out some kind of agreement. But the ongoing negotiations broke down completely after the US band filed the lawsuit. The lawsuit was asking for 3 things: an injunction, lost profits, and general damages. An injunction is when a court tells someone to stop doing something. The US One Direction wanted the court to tell the UK One Direction to stop using the name One Direction immediately on their products, advertising, and any sort of marketing, as well as order the UK band to destroy any materials and products that had the name. Secondly, they claimed that they were owed lost profits of 3 times what the UK One Direction made, claiming that due to brand confusion, they had lost out on that money. In simplest terms, the US band contended that their fans would go online looking to buy One Direction's music and would instead accidentally buy the UK band's music instead of theirs. But I do want to point out that this was in fact happening, but the other way. In August of 2011, I myself purchased the US One Direction's album The Light, thinking it was the UK One Direction's music. And after listening to about half of the album, I went online and I was like, so this is a weird album. Like, this is a bizarre sound. It doesn't really sound like One Direction at all. I was immediately met with a reply of someone being like, well, because it's not One Direction at all. It's the other One Direction. I made the same mistake. And there were all these other comments of people being like, I did it too. Yeah, me too. Yeah, I was really confused until I realized they're 2 different bands. So the US band's claim that they were losing money off the confusion was ridiculous because they were absolutely making money off the confusion. At the very least, they made $10 off of me and 99 cents off the Today Show. In the lawsuit, the US band also claimed that they had built a considerable following of their own and cited as proof of this the sales figures and video views, which, again, included a lot of mistaken sales and mistaken views of New Directioners who were desperately seeking the UK 1D's music before there was any music available. The US band's music wasn't bad, it was typical indie rock, decent enough. But fans that made the mistake of buying US One Direction's music very often sent the band hate, accusing them of being copycats and trying to capitalize on UK One Direction's success. And the US band said that this hate hurt the goodwill and reputation of their band in the public perception that they had tried to build so hard over the years. Hence the demand that the UK band stop using their name, particularly before they embarked on a US tour, and forever cemented in the minds of the American public that One Direction was the UK band. Predictably, the hate against them increased tenfold after they announced the lawsuit. Directioners rushed in from every corner of the internet to defend UK One Direction and point out that this lawsuit seemed like a pretty obvious attempt to get cash from a band that was making a ton of money. Seeming to agree, the courts did not grant the injunction before One Direction's Up All Night tour began. And in fact, the lawyers from both bands spent the entirety of the summer trying to work out some kind of agreement, which they finally managed to come to in September of 2012. The bands announced that they had settled the lawsuit for an undisclosed sum, as well as an agreement that the UK band would keep the name One Direction, while the US band would change their name to Uncharted Shores. It looks like nothing much became of the other band after the whole name change debacle. And in one last bit of unnecessary awkwardness from the universe, Spotify still shows the album Uncharted Shores by One Direction, and attributes it, sure enough, to our 5 UK boys. Awkward.